250 employees per 1 million people reported by the OECD. Canadian companies on average use less capital and technology and are less innovative than many other advanced economies. Compared to the U.S., Canada invests less than half in research and development, software, hardware, and data, as well as spending on marketing and sales. This matters because the standard of living in Canada has deteriorated compared to other countries. Business insolvencies in the year ending February 29, 2024 have increased nearly 60% according to the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. Month over month, Statistics Canada continues to report that more businesses are closing than are opening. And that is why I'd like to move the following motion, that given that the Bank of Canada is warning that weak productivity and low business investment has become a national emergency, that Canada has long lagged the United States when it comes to how much the economy produces per hour of work, and that Canada has fallen behind G7 countries, with only Italy seeing a larger decline in productivity relative to the United States, the lack of Canadian business investment in machinery, equipment, and intellectual property, and that new Canadians are working in low-wage, low-productivity jobs that don't take advantage of skill sets they possess, and that this weak productivity is making the central bank's job of controlling inflation more difficult, the committee called for 4 meetings to be held immediately and invite the following witnesses: the Governor of the Bank of Canada, the Interim Chief Statistician, various small and medium-sized businesses and industry representatives, and that the committee hear from these witnesses the extent of the harm to the Canadian economy and the ability to control high inflation caused by weak productivity and low investment, and from government officials what they are going to do to remedy this emergency and to report back to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. So the motion has been moved, so we'll open it up for debate, and I recognize Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe I can get clarification in terms of the the mover's intention with the chief statistician, because his party tried to eliminate the long-term census and actually did so under Tony Clement, the former Minister of Industry. And so I'm wondering what the relevancy or their intent is about this position, whether they're trying to get rid of the census again, or whether or not this is for a witness that they would like to have testify in front of us, given there's a definite conflict in terms of their position and the chief statistician and the Canada Census.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. I don't know if Mr. Viss, you want to respond to that. Otherwise, I have Mr. Turnbull. I'll recognize Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Briefly to my colleague, Mr. Massey, regarding the information presented by Statistics Canada deserves to be raised at Industry Committee. It's not every day the Bank of Canada talks about a crisis of productivity in this country. I know we're about to commence C-27 amendments, but I'm hoping with the will of this committee we can have extra meetings to discuss some very serious concerns raised by the business community in Canada and the Independent Bank of Canada, and to hear from Statistics Canada on the alarming trends that they are outlining in their regular reporting to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. J'ai Monsieur Turnbull et Monsieur Sorbara.
Mr. Turnbull, then Mr. Sorbara.
Thanks, Chair. So I know that today's meeting is supposed to get into clause-by-clause analysis. So Mr. Viss has brought this motion. I would just note that we had just unanimously passed a subcommittee report on agenda. We had a very productive meeting that resulted in this report that we just passed unanimously, which has a schedule that is outlining all of our meetings and how we'll spend those and the priorities that we've agreed to. And I will say that we came to consensus on this through a very productive conversation. So our committee schedule seems to be quite full. The Conservatives keep bringing up many other topics that they would like to study, which, you know, it's certainly their prerogative to do so. But there's only so many things that you can fit into an agenda. We've all agreed that C-27 and clause by clause is the priority to get through. So I see that, you know, I feel like these things are being brought up in order to delay C-27. So I want to know whether the intention of this, Mr. Viss, is to delay getting to C-27, or whether the Conservatives are legitimately interested in studying this, in which case I would say the most appropriate time would certainly be when we finish C27 or the other items that we've come to agreement on. So I'm not sure, it might be the fall by the time we actually would get to something like this. And, if the Conservatives want to replace this with one of their other priorities that they've set out in our discussions, there's a number of them here. There's number 5 and number 6, I think, were number 5 definitely was a Conservative. So maybe you want to substitute for one of the other things to do a meeting on this topic. I mean, so I would wonder if the Conservatives could clarify what the intention is here. Is it to delay C27, or is it to study this, and which other priority of theirs would they like to substitute this for?
Okay, just before I turn it over to you, Mr. Viss, I have Mr. Sorbara, Mr. Perkins, Mr. Massé as well, so I'll go to Mr. Sorbara first.
Good morning, Chair, and happy to see everyone this morning. Happy Monday to everyone. First comment to my colleague MP Viss, and I was very happy to hear you say that the Independent Bank of Canada, that was very important. I thank you for putting that on the record. The Bank of Canada is independent, and I know you're the leader of the official opposition wanted to fire, I think at one time, the Bank of Canada governor, and said that publicly. And I think the independence of the Bank of Canada is something very, very important for institutional integrity for many, many reasons. So I'm glad you put that on the record, Brad. And so forth. I do want to get clarification on it. These meetings would be in addition to the meetings of C27. I just want to get that clarification. Look, we all want to have a strong economy with strong growth and creating good jobs. I think yesterday's announcement on the AI front was a part of that endeavor, and it continues to be. So I'm going to stop there and so forth. I do look forward to getting to C27 and going clause by clause.
Thank you, Mr. Sorbara. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To MP Turnbull, these are in addition. I'm not surprised that you would like us to remove the Green Slush Fund from further study and put this back on. But just to the broader issue, the committee is in charge of its own destiny, and the statements and speech by the Governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of Canada officials happened after our steering committee meeting where we agreed on the agenda. We thought it would be an appropriate time, given that productivity obviously is an urgent issue, or the Governor of the Bank of Canada wouldn't have raised the issue at this time, to not delay it till next year to have a discussion or some other mythical time, but to actually do it when the Bank of Canada has actually raised this as a primary concern about the future ability of our country to afford the programs and the lifestyle and the things that we all enjoy and love so much about being here. So in the spirit of being in charge of our own destiny and being nimble in order to reflect things that go on in the economy, because I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, that it's incumbent to have these officials here to talk about this urgent priority raised by the Governor and his officials.
Merci, Monsieur Perkins. Monsieur Massé, ensuite Monsieur Gall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just, having lived through debacles with the Canada Census, which was actually seen as a model for many democracies for many years. We've had, everything from the outsourcing to Lockheed Martin, which we were able to stop under the Liberals. That was a Paul Martin regime decision, because that actually would have made our private information vulnerable to the United States under the Patriot Act. Nevertheless, we've had Mr. Sheikh resign, we had Mr. Smith resign. I'm just curious about the Conservatives' renewed faith of the chief interim statistician right now, given their history of wanting to eliminate the long-form census under Stephen Harper, and Tony Clement, being the former Minister of Industry here, making stuff up on the fly, quite frankly, about the census, including actually talking about putting people in jail. that's the history that we have here at this committee with regards to the Conservative Party and the census. So I would like further clarification about whether or not they have changed their position on the census and value the interim chief statistician to come to this table, or whether they're going to attack that individual when they come here and try to eliminate the census again. That's what I gain from what I'm looking at this motion here, because it seems highly unusual that the Conservatives have actually renounced their position given their history here and their former Minister of Industry being Tony Clement and what took place, and then at the same time is one of the star witnesses for this motion that's been presented for us at the last moment. So I have a lot of reservation about this. Again, having fought the previous outsourcing to Lockheed Martin to continuing the long-form census, which was seen as a negativity to the Stephen Harper administration, to today, I'm not sure where the Conservatives stand with regards to the chief statistician. And I would not want the chief statistician to come here and to be attacked or actually to be manipulated at any point in time versus what we have in the motion here. So again, to the Conservatives, is this a witness that they have as a value-added aspect to their motion in terms of wanting that have the information come forward, or is it actually a front to actually trying to eliminate the census again?
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm going to need a little help here. I think that this will, in fact, slow down the process of our work here. Open question. What's the purpose of having a subcommittee develop an agenda and a plan and to agree? We've actually reported they accepted to the report, and we've 5 minutes later trying to bust up the flow of work here. 5 minutes. What kind of organization behaves like that? I'm not sure that productivity is of much interest to the Conservatives. I mean, in fact, why hadn't you suggested that immigration? We have a policy here. We have that policy of inviting cheap labor to come in here and do jobs. And from an electoral point of view, it's an advantage to both Conservatives and Liberals. But at the time, when it was the time to develop policies on imports of petroleum products, now it's pretty. When we export oil, it's completely destructive to the industrial capacity in Quebec. And this is an issue that was raised much before the Bank of Canada and its statement. So it was sort of neglected or disregarded by the Conservative Party. So at our last meeting, we would have the opportunity to discuss other issues. And I'm one of those who believes that our work is of value and that we should continue. C-27, we should continue to work on that and get the thing done. Thank you, Mr. Garon. Mr. Viss would like to...
To Mr. Massey, I'll point out that the labor force survey, the work that Statistics Canada does on understanding Canada's economy goes far beyond the parameters of the census. And I want the right data from the right people at the right committee to study the right problems that Canadians are raising with all of us right now. It was during a period of time when Parliament wasn't sitting that the Bank of Canada made this announcement. I, as an opposition MP, have only so many tools at my disposal to raise the issues that the business community in Canada is very concerned about. And this is right at the top of their list. If I was not using my ability as an opposition member to raise a motion in committee with a story that has really got a lot of people concerned in Canada's business community, I wouldn't be doing my job effectively. They need to know we're listening. my constituents need to know that I'm listening. The private sector doesn't get a lot of attention from this government right now, and I got to do my job, and that's what I'm doing here in good faith. So I don't know why you're attacking me so strongly this morning. This was done in good faith, and I didn't want to do it in a way that would disrupt C27. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Massey.
Chair, I'm not attacking. I'm just bringing up the facts of the matter, and I don't want to agree to a motion that would put a chief statistician in front of me here, given the history that's taken place with your party. And I don't know where your party stands on the chief statistician who actually oversees this information and this process. So it's as simple as that, and that's what I want to know, because I can't agree to put somebody in front of us right here that could be attacked for something that just basically holding a position and doing their job is supposed to be. And that's the reason why I'm questioning that, and I want to know specifically whether the Conservative Party agrees with the census or not. I mean, that's a specific thing I'm asking. You don't have to answer it, but it's not an attack. It's a factual thing. I support the long-form census. I support the short-form census. I support the chief statistician. I support the whole department. All those things are on the table for me, and I want to know that if I'm supposed to support putting somebody in front of me without the proper tools and also the reasons to be here, because it seems odd to me that that is the balance of what you're actually asking for in this motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Massey, and I see no other speakers, hence, and I see no consensus. Hence, I would ask the clerk to put the motion to a vote, please.
Mr. Turnbull.
Against.
Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Madame Lapointe.
Contre.
Mr. Sorbera.
No, but I'm glad to hear about the independence.
Mr. Bynon.
No.
Monsieur Généreux.
Oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Viss.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Monsieur Garon.
No.
Mr. Massey.
No.
So the motion is defeated, and I'm glad to see that after 2 weeks in our constituencies, everyone's in good spirits. It fills me with hope as we embark on this journey to do clause by clause on C27. Et j'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue, en fait.
And I'd like to welcome once again our witnesses who are going to be with us throughout the process to answer our questions. Mark Sen, Senior ADM, Strategy and Innovation Policy. Samir Shabra, Director General, Marketplace Framework Policy Branch. Runa Angus, Senior Director, Strategy and Innovation Policy. Yes, Mr. No? I don't mean to interrupt, but there were conversations said that we could also get people from Rio Tinto. Where are we at with that process? Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk. There will be 1 hour on the 17th of April with the representatives of Rio Tinto and another with the minister. Well, it's not confirmed, but it would be in conjunction with the main estimates. So thanks to our witnesses, and we'll begin the process with us. Thank you for that. And as you know, undoubtedly, April, May are going to be devoted to Bill C-27, occupy most of our time. So we're going to meet each other often over the course of the next few weeks. So, in keeping with 75.1 of the Standing Orders, Article 1, the title is set aside, and we will be looking, and we will begin with Article 2, Clause 2. My the first amendment is a government addenda, G1. If Mr. Turnbull.
One is a very technical change to the bill. It's not making a policy change or shift to the bill. It's a similar adjustment has been made in ADA's schedule. So it's a very I would say, insignificant change. That's my understanding. So hopefully we can deal with this one fairly quickly and move on to CPC 1. Perhaps Mr. Chon can just clarify exactly. I think I've said it right, but if you could clarify that.
Le Président, comme le membre honorable.
Well, as the honourable member said, it is a very technical amendment proposed by the Department of Justice so that we can get a proper interpretation of the bill itself. That's my comment on G1.
It's a technical amendment or administrative amendment, right? Which I didn't hear you say what it actually does. Mr. Shin.
Thank you very much for the question. The Act currently reads in the section, the schedule to this Act. The Department of Justice has recommended for more clarity and better reading to emphasize the Schedule 1 to this Act. The addition here is the addition of the numeral 1, just for precision.
So, if I could, Mr. Chair, so why does it have to be numbered, that schedule?
Thanks for the question. My understanding from the DOJ is that this is simply for precision and clarity to ensure that there's no unnecessary ambiguity with the reading of the Act.
So does it have to do with the fact that you have introduced in a further amendment later in the bill another schedule?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with any other amendments.
It doesn't have anything to do with Schedule 2 in ADA?
No.
Well, so if it doesn't have anything to do with Schedule 2 in ADA, I don't understand why you need to make it Schedule 1 since it's the only schedule in the bill.
Thanks again for the question. I appreciate where you're coming from. In effect, once and if the bill passes, as C-27 passes, ADA would become its own standalone piece of legislation, as well as CPPA would become its own standalone piece of legislation. So the two schedules would not interact with one another. So this is purely a recommendation made by the Department of Justice for the appropriate reading of CPPA once it's promulgated.
Okay, I'll think about that and come back. I don't know if you've got.
Merci. J'ai Madame Thomas.
Ms. Thomas, and then member.
I'll actually pass on my turn right now. Sorry. Thank you.
It's fine, Mr. Massey.
That again. That's not what we expected here this morning. So,
essentially, even though the current Digital Charter Implementation Act is one current legal project, there are three standalone pieces of legislation contained within it: the CPPA, the Tribunal, and AIDA. Upon promulgation, each of them become their own statutes. So CPPA has a schedule, AIDA has a schedule, and so the two schedules have nothing to do with each other, though. But for precision, the Department of Justice would like us to suggest that Schedule 1 is what we are referring to at the outset of the notwithstanding the fact that there is not more than one schedule currently within the bill. It's simply for the purposes of appropriate reading to suggest that this is what we are referring to when we talk about the bill. But it has no relationship to to the other schedule that will appear in AIDA.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think this through because, like, I have been wanting these bills separated from the day I met the minister 2.5 years ago about the bill. So
I think that's a separate question, Mr. Chair, which is the consideration of this legal project, aka the Digital Charter Implementation Act, and the three bills contained within it, notwithstanding the fact that they are being contemplated and considered as one legal project, C-27, they will become standalone legislation in so much as the statutes of Canada will be amended to include a statute called CPPA, a statute called AIDA, and a statute related to the tribunal.
Right. So that brings me back to it's a political decision to actually assimilate the three bills that could have actually been separated. It was a political decision to actually keep the three bills together.
I don't know if that's a question or a comment.
It's a comment. Sorry, that's just.
It seems more like a comment,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Massey. Mr. Perkins and then Madam Thomas.
So I'm struggling with this. The schedule, you have an amendment for Schedule 2 in this bill that's later on. So what's Schedule 1? They must be, in terms of the numbering, there's no Schedule 1 in Ada, and you've put in Schedule 2 in Ada. So you must have been contemplating that there is a relationship between that schedule in the sense of not the content and what it does, but in this bill that you're turning the unnamed annex schedule in the Privacy Act, part of the bill, into Schedule 1 because you've introduced an amendment called Schedule 2.
So Justice has advised us that this is drafting convention, and that is why they wanted the schedule to be named Schedule 1. There is no policy reason. There is no, this is not related to any of the other government amendments. It's just drafting convention is what we were advised by the Department of Justice.
But can you call something Schedule 2 if there's no Schedule 1?
One to the CPPA. That's what's in question at the moment.
Well, no, there is no Schedule 1 in CPPA. You're renaming an annex schedule as Schedule 1, and there's a reason for doing that other than just getting it wrong, which, seeing as the government has introduced 55 amendments, it clearly got a lot wrong on this bill. But the 55 amendments, the first one you've put is changing this to Schedule 1 because you introduced an amendment that's called Schedule 2 with there being no Schedule 1. I think it's a pretty simple question. Doesn't 1 follow 2? Isn't that why you're numbering it? The 2 follow 1, I should say. Sorry, you're right, Tony. Who's on first?
Read the current draft of the Act on page 3 as it relates to enactment. Clause 2 reads, "The Consumer Privacy Protection Act, whose text is as follows and whose schedule is set out in the schedule to this Act, is enacted. An act to support and promote electronic commerce by protecting personal information that is collected, used, or disclosed in the course of commercial activities." CPPA clearly does refer to a schedule as per the text of the bill, and so it is in fact related to CPPA and is in fact, for the precision of drafting convention, advised by the Department of Justice to schedule it as Schedule 1.
But presumably the Department of Justice drafted this bill, and that it was the only schedule in the original Bill C-27. As such, it didn't need a number. They would have numbered it. So now you're amending it for more precision to say Schedule 1 for a reason, and it's not that there isn't another schedule. It's because you have to number, you already numbered the other schedule. Like, it's a simple question, like, in the sense that you've got one schedule in the bill that you're renumbering, and you've got another schedule that's new, an amendment that you're proposing. And you can't have two schedules that don't have numbers. So you've said in the opening of the bill, we're calling the one existing schedule Schedule 1 because you've got a future amendment. Is that not the case?
No. As indicated, Mr. Chair, the schedules are strictly speaking to the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, the CPPA. And the schedule is what's outlined in the CPPA. And so, notwithstanding that there are potential schedules that might exist on the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, this schedule, as per drafting convention, is advised by the Department of Justice would be more legible if it was understood as Schedule 1.
Well, can I ask why they missed that in the first place?
Mr. Chair, obviously, our drafters at the Department of Justice work very hard to try and ensure that the bill is in the best state possible at the time of introduction. But obviously, as has been seen through multiple corrections over multiple courses of legislative amendment acts, why we have a statute update act, in fact, for this very purpose, to ensure that we get it right. And so that's essentially what's being requested by the Department of Justice.
So if this section is left the way it is, let's say your amendment here is defeated, for the sake of argument. Can you still move Schedule 2 in that amendment, since it's in the same bill? And that this bill would start off with just a schedule and Schedule 2. Is that the legal issue?
As I've laid out, this is strictly speaking related to the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, and so has no bearing on future amendments related to the Artificial Intelligence and Data
No, but it's
Act.
all part of one bill. It's all part of the same bill.
But
Bill
it's not part of the
C-27.
same, Mr. Chair, it's not part of the same legislation.
Yes, it is, because the bill is a piece of legislation before Parliament.
No, the bill contains 3 legislative acts. The bill and the 3 pieces of legislation are not the same. The bill is the Digital Charter Implementation Act. The 3 pieces of legislation that it is amending or enacting are the CPPA, the Tribunal, and AIDA.
So what is Schedule 1 if this amendment doesn't go through?
If this amendment does not go through, the enactment of act clause at the start of the CPPA will refer to a schedule unnumbered, which by drafting convention is not what Justice would like to see it as, but therefore will be slightly less legible.
What is that schedule?
And what is that schedule?
Schedule 1 just adds, it's a holdover from PIPEDA. It adds the World Anti-Doping Agency as being subject to CPPA as it is subject to PIPEDA currently.
Can they refer to us where that is in the bill right now?
Okay.
Very good, Mr. Perkins. I have MP Thomas and MP Massey.
Thank you. Okay, so sorry, just for further clarification then, Mr. Shan, if Schedule 1 were not to pass today, or this First Amendment, if Schedule 1 were not to pass, what would be the impact on this legislation?
Mr. Chair, the amendment is simply how the schedule is referenced in the Act, not the schedule itself. And so what the amendment is proposing is to reference the schedule as Schedule 1 rather than schedule. And so, as noted, it would be a slightly less legible bill in the eyes of the Department of Justice from a drafting perspective.
Okay, so thank you. And you've used this term legible a few times. Legible, less legible, more legible. What do you mean by that?
Mr. Chair, essentially what the Department of Justice attempts to do is provide ease of interpretability. And so what I'm saying legible, I mean that it's easily interpretable and understood by those who are seeking to understand and utilize the legislation.
Okay, so essentially, in the same way that I would read through notes and I would have headings, subheadings, and bullet points, that is essentially what we're looking at in terms of the increased legibility with this bill.
I'm not a legislative drafter, Mr. Chair, but I understand that this is understood to be convention so that as to ease the reader.
Okay. And so then you have so you're saying that even if you don't have a Schedule 1, though, you could still potentially have a Schedule 2, and that would still somehow increase the legibility of the bill.
So, Mr. Chair, I believe we will come to the schedules of the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act when we get to AIDA. This is the schedule of the CPPA.
I understand that, but I think sure, but if this does not go through, and then there is no named Schedule 1, it would be confusing to have a named Schedule 2. So the two of them kind of need to be discussed in conjunction with one another.
So, Mr. Chair, the schedule we are referring to here is the schedule of the CPPA. IEDA does have schedules that we will contemplate, including potential amendments to those schedules. But the legibility of IEDA should be understood within the context of IEDA.
Then why would it be called Schedule 2 there instead of just IEDA Schedule 1? Because to your point, you have said that there are 3 separate pieces of legislation here being discussed in an omnibus manner.
So as I understand it, right now, the proposal is to refer to the schedule in IEDA as Schedule 2. If this was not adopted, we would probably seek to refer to it as a schedule, just like this one, as in not drafted as such.
So, okay.
Contrary to drafting.
So you have 3 separate bills being discussed as...
One bill, 3 laws.
Sorry, okay, so you have 1 bill, 3 laws
Yeah.
being discussed as a collective.
Yeah.
But then if Schedule 1 is precluded from one of those laws, you're saying that that won't have an impact on Schedule 2 within the 3rd law.
I think we would probably seek to refer to it as a schedule, like this one is referred to now as a schedule. But that would have to come when we get to the consideration of Schedule 2.
I understand that, but then I think then what we're seeing though then is that they are related in terms of the numbering scheme and the legibility of the bill.
There is a relationship in the numbering, but one doesn't preclude the other. Calling it Schedule 1 doesn't necessitate a Schedule 2.
Sure, not the content, but in fact the naming then is no longer increasing the legibility of the bill.
It is still drafting convention to refer to it as Schedule 1, as I understand it, from the Department of Justice.
So sorry, so even if it doesn't pass, it'll still be referred to as Schedule 1?
No, sorry. To refer to it, even if the anticipated outcome is that Schedule 2 doesn't exist,
Yes,
to refer to it as Schedule 1 is still drafting convention, as I understand it.
I understand. But then Schedule 2 would only exist if Schedule 1 does.
Schedule
terms
2,
of the
as I
naming
said,
convention.
from a naming convention, Schedule 2 will be Schedule 2 if this is Schedule 1.
Yes.
And if this is just referred to as schedule,
Yes.
there would probably be a move towards understanding the schedule in IEDA as also just a schedule unnumbered.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Massé, suivi de Madame O'Connell.
Is there a document that you have that tells us what drafting convention is?
Mr. Chair, I am not in possession of that document as I'm not a drafter. And so I believe there are likely drafting conventions that are utilized by the Department of Justice, but they also, as I know, evolve over time. And there's drafting, which is why they're conventions. And so I'm not at liberty to share a document.
No, I appreciate that, but I mean, we're being referenced continually about a drafting convention like we're supposed to understand it like it's a set of hockey rules that we would understand. And I'm not aware of any drafting convention that's ever been presented to me. And a lot of this bill is about trust, to be quite frank. I mean, if the general public wants to see the bill, it's right here. And it's much smaller than actually the amendments that are in front of me right here in terms of fixing the bill. And we're supposed to follow drafting convention that could have subsequent consequences on all these amendments, but we don't even know what drafting convention is. Okay. No question.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. I have to wonder that display from the Conservatives just now, if this is a filibuster for this legislation. And I just heard the earlier debate on the motion about giving, attention to the private sector and understanding. And to sit here and listen for more than 15 minutes on a debate on legislation regarding, excuse me, I have the floor, to listen to a debate on whether to title something Schedule 1, not the details of the schedule, but simply titling it Schedule 1 versus just schedule, on a bill of significance dealing with the importance of AI, to dealing with privacy for Canadians. The Conservatives' display of filibustering for this amount of time to debate whether or not to label something Schedule 1 versus schedule, shows Canadians just how unserious they are in dealing with Canadians' privacy in a day and age of AI. So I would strongly hope that if there's debate around the legislation and amendments, I would strongly hope that it's genuine, legitimate debate that will make legislation better and not some sad display around Schedule 1 versus schedule, so that Canadians can actually have confidence that the parliamentarians sent here are actually doing the work to benefit them, because that was frankly embarrassing.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. And just for MPs who are around the table, in this committee, we try to show some respect to other members. So when one member has the floor, I expect others to wait their turn to speak. I do it all the time myself. Okay, so Mr. Perkins.
Okay. Well, perhaps I'll help the last member who spoke understand, who hasn't participated in the 21 meetings we've had so far on this bill, why this is about. And because the
mansplain.
And because she's an expert on C21 on C27. So let me start by saying I think, Mr. Shen, so they are linked. They're linked in the idea that one requires the other, and that 1 is 1 and 2 is 2. And the reason why this is important, so that you understand that, is because of what Schedule 2 says. So perhaps I can enlighten the Liberal members who aren't aware of what Schedule 2 says. And Schedule 2 say what Schedule 2 does is it allows the government to moderate content Canadians can see online. And that's why these two are linked. And let me quote directly from Schedule 2. The use of an artificial intelligence system in matters relating to A, the moderation of content that is found on an online communication platform, including a search engine or social media service, or B, the prioritization of the presentation of such content. So to be clear, the government has given themselves the ability through that provision, which is linked to Schedule 1 in the numbering, through this provision to regulate design, function, presentation, and use of AI systems on social media platforms as it relates to what content the government wants prioritized and moderated on social media platforms. Well, the minister's submission to the committee outlined that the purpose of the provision seeks to tackle the bias in AI. All AI, by the way, has a bias. The powers provided to ISED in the regulation will allow them to go much beyond simply addressing the issue in AI systems. ISED has already confirmed this. In speaking to the business leaders breakfast hosted by McCarthy Tetro advisors at the TD Bank Tower in Toronto on November 7th, 2023, Simon Kennedy, the Deputy Minister of ISED, told industry groups that the purpose of this provision in the Minister's amendments to Bill C-27 seeks to tackle online misinformation. This could be accomplished through the Minister's amendment to ADA, which are still very vague, provided ISED with an incredible amount of power, including the legal authority to moderate online content to Canadians, as has been argued in this committee by Barry Suchman. Importantly, the provisions of ADA with regard to content moderation as they related to high-impact AI systems have very few safeguards and are incredibly vague. As Barry Suchman highlighted in his written submission to the committee, the provisions outlined in Bill C-27 will extend to the AI systems that filter, rank, or recommend the content platforms such as social media, search engines, or any digital service curate
Just
or moderate.
Mr. Perkins, if I can just interrupt for 1 second. Here I have 20 pages of amendments. You're talking about the substance of Schedule 2. We will be voting on Schedule 2 at the 20th page of this package. So if we can just stick to the G1 that we're debating, try to focus on the amendment that's before us. And when we get there, you'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about the amendment, but we will get there at some point. Now we're on G1, so if I can just ask members in general to try to keep their comments to the amendment beforehand.
The relevance is very clear. The relevance is the officials have agreed and linked that Schedule 1 is called Schedule 1 because there is a Schedule 2 being presented in the bill for a convention of drafting instructions. And that brings the relevance into question
Point of order.
in this committee bill.
Mr. Turnbull, on
Mr.
a point of
Perkins
order.
is putting words in the officials' mouths. They didn't say what he just said that they said. So, I mean, is he allowed to just say anything that when we were just witnessed what the officials had said about Schedule 1 being separate and being a convention, a drafting convention? Mr. Perkins is somehow suggesting that they've agreed to something that that they didn't state. So,
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. I don't think that's necessarily a point of order, but so I'll let Mr. Perkins continue. But if you can make sure that what you're
It's
saying,
a drafting convention because of Schedule 2, which introduces Schedule 2 as relevance to this particular amendment.
I'll let the officials answer, Mr. Perkins, if you may. But the substance of Schedule 2 will be voted on when we get there, and we're very far from there at this point. So, Mr. Shan, I don't know if you want to respond to Mr. Perkins.
Note again that Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 are numbered as such, but Schedule 1 lives and breathes on its own and would still be drafting in convention to be referred to as Schedule 1, as I understand it, notwithstanding that we will have a discussion about Schedule 2, as you know, when we get to it.
But Schedule 2 is introduced here because you're renumbering Schedule 1. That was already part of the presentation. Otherwise, you wouldn't have called it Schedule 2. You would have called it Schedule 1.
We're calling it Schedule 1 at the recommendation of the Department of Justice. There is a Schedule 2 that will appear in AIDA, and as I know, we will discuss. Well, as I understand it, we'll discuss Schedule 2 when we get to Schedule 2.
But that's the relevance, Mr. Chair, which is the fact that Schedule 1 was being introduced as an amendment by the government because they're introducing another amendment calling it Schedule 2, and therefore they have to number them for the clarity in this bill. And when you bring Schedule 1 into that brings Schedule 2 as the drafting convention rationale into the discussion, allows us to discuss Schedule 2 here as part of the where we're at in these clause-by-clause hearings.
Mr. Perkins, continue. Try to just keep it relevant to G1, which has been explained at length.
Well, but the relevance to G1 is because G2 provides this extraordinary power in the scheduling, and without that, I can filibuster if you want. The member on the opposite side likes to heckle in committee, which
Perkins,
isn't the way this operates.
and I agree with Mr. Perkins on this. I would appreciate no heckling at this committee. This is not how we do things. Monsieur Garon, sur un appel au règlement.
Ouais, je voulais juste vous exprimer un regret que j'ai parce que.
Well, I have a slight regret here on how we're working here. That we just dealt with a motion on productivity, and we're not being productive. Well, it's unfortunate, but Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Is there another country in the world besides China that has put a provision into its legislation that gives the government the power to moderate content online of AI?
So, Mr. Chair, the provision
Point
in
of order.
question, which is not related to the amendment that I believe is before the committee, but the provision sets out the types of high-impact AI systems that will be subject to regulation. And the schedule does list a number of high-impact AI systems, including those that can influence behavior as it relates to online recommendations. And that type of artificial intelligence system is the subject of considerable amounts of activity in the international fora.
I have Mr. Turnbull on a point of order.
Relevance is the point of order, which is a point of order. This has nothing to do with the amendment that we're focused on, which is the change of a number, is the adding of a 1 to the schedule for ease of reading. So what I'm not understanding here is how Mr. Perkins keeps asking questions about something that you've already indicated is 20 pages in to the amendments we have that has to do with ADA, the ADA portion of the bill. That's not the portion of the bill that we're focusing on. This is the very first amendment, and this looks very much like a filibuster.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull, and duly, I accept your point of order. I'll ask members to stay relevant to. On clause 2, we still have, if we get through this amendment, we still have 155 other amendments to go through. So that's just on clause 2. So we need to move a little more swiftly, and so I'll ask members in their questions and their comments to stay relevant to the amendment that's before the committee. Do I have any other? I have Mr. Mass. You still have the floor, Mr. Perkins, but please stay relevant to G1.
In the last Parliament, the government tried to legislate algorithms through C10 and then backed off and then brought in C11 this time and said, look at us, aren't we being nice? We're just going to tell people how to write their algorithms, not actually look at them. But in this bill, Schedule 2, which is numbered Schedule 2, and you're having to amend Schedule 1 as Schedule 1 because of Schedule 2. I'd like to know.
Sorry, Mr. Perkins, I have a point of order.
Mr. Perkins keeps referring to Schedule 2, which is not this amendment. The amendment specifically refers to a 1. So maybe he could refrain from referring to a schedule that we're not debating.
Well, it's an administrative drafting convention that the government has introduced because they had made a mistake in the drafting of this bill and introduced a Schedule 2 in the draft that was given to the committee in advance as a draft amendment, the minister's 8 after his appearance, and then now as formally through the clause-by-clause process introduced it. It's very clear to most people that the drafting convention is you can't have a Schedule 2 if there is no Schedule 1. It just doesn't make sense. And therefore, the government drew the link by introducing this that allows us to be relevant in the discussion, because I don't believe you can have the other amendment without this amendment.
Well, that's a good question to ask the officials, Mr. Perkins. Perhaps I would ask you to stay on the formatting or the numbering of the schedules, not the substance of the schedules. We'll get to that if we ever get to that, Mr. Perkins.
Can you introduce Schedule 2 as Schedule 2 if you don't renumber the annex schedule as Schedule 1?
As noted, Mr. Chair, I think the likelihood is if this does not get numbered as a schedule, it would have implications then for the subsequent schedule, and there would probably be a move to try and keep the two consistent. And so this one would refer to an unnumbered schedule, and so then would the schedule reference in AIDA.
So that's the relevance. That it has implications on Schedule 2, which allows us in this instance today to ask about that schedule and make sure we understand what the impact of not having that change in Schedule 1 done and its implications in 2 if 2 isn't in this bill the way it is. So we get, I believe, to ask questions because the The Assistant Deputy Minister has just made, once again, the link between the two.
If I understand correctly, Mr. Shan, what you're saying is that basically they would be named differently provided this change in G1 is not adopted, but the substance of them would not change. It's how they are labeled. So I would appreciate questions on the labeling of the scheduling, not the substance of the labeling. We will get there, Mr. Perkins. Well, I'm not so sure we'll get there, but I hope we'll get there. It's in the plan. So, Mr. Perkins.
I'll go to the next, whoever's next on the list.
Thank you. I have Mr. Massey.
Just real quickly, normally we have the department that's actually proposing legislative changes in front of us. And I think this is the problem that we're faced here, is we have the Department of Industry here representing the Department of Justice. Has the Department of Justice provided any written material that you can give us at committee so we can actually resolve this? My standing convention is that a department really actually has representation in front of the committee when it wants amendments. That's the problem here, is we have basically a vessel for justice coming for an amendment at industry here, and there's the confusion because regardless of such, there is consequentiality of this change. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking for this change if there wasn't a reason and that there wasn't consequentiality. And if it was convention that it be included, then that's a pretty bold mistake to begin with in the legislation, or alternatively, it has a consequentiality that we know. So is there any written information for the Department of Justice? Can we get anybody on the Department of Justice on the phone for this? I don't know. It's just, call a friend. Well, it's a mess because we have a vessel here. Well, we're here for a reason. No, I mean, the parliamentary secretary can shake his head and they can heckle and they can do all the stuff they've been doing beginning this meeting, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there's a lack of trust here and we don't have, again, information. So specifically, is there any written information from the Department of Justice or a representative of the Department of Justice about the amendment they want for this industry legislation?
Specifically for G1, you're asking, Mr.
For
Massey.
G1, yes.
Mr. Shan.
I have no written information from the Department of Justice. I have, as we will throughout the entirety of this process, be relaying information that is both of a content nature as well as of a drafting nature. I will be relaying that as it has been relayed, and in this particular case, it is about the drafting convention of the naming of schedules, and it is simply such that it is understood that schedules are best understood with precision, and therefore we are asking for it to be renumbered.
So the bottom line is I couldn't be bothered to show up. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. And I guess the other question I have is, what other department amendments do we have other than industry that are going to come forward in the number of amendments that we have coming forward? And maybe we should have them here with us, available. I mean, if we want to get this done properly.
Thank you, Mr. Massey and Mr. Viss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding Schedule 1, it refers to subsection 6.3. What page can you point me to in the legislation for subsection 6.3?
These are the amendments.
Mr. Chair, on page 7.
Under application,
Thank you.
3, this act also applies to an organization set out in column 1 of the schedule in respect of personal information set out in column 2.
This act also applies to an organization set out in column 1 of the schedule in respect of personal information set out in column 2. What organization is that? Is that the one that Ms. Angus referred to, Mr. Chair? The World Anti-Doping Agency?
That's correct.
Okay. And then paragraph 122.2. Let's look at that as well. What page is that on, Mr. Chair?
That would be on page 61 of the bill, under orders. 2C, amend the schedule by adding or deleting in column 1 a reference to an organization, or by adding or deleting in column 2 the description of personal information in relation to an organization in column 1.
That's 122C, specifying information for the purposes of Section 51. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct.
No.
Okay. 122, 2C.
120. Oh, my apologies.